My video venomizing the Amazing Digital Circus characters did so much better than I was expecting, gaining like 1,000 views in its first weekish. Thank you all so much for that. And a lot of you have commented saying you want to see a part 2 and venomize the rest of the crew. So let's pick up where we left off and get into the Amazing Venomized Circus Part 2, starting off with Zooble. And I thought the designs from the first round were hard to venomize. Whew. Let's create some chaos.
We are not Caine, we are Venom!
In an instant, Caine's human teeth multiplied and grew, ending in sharp points. Tentacles erupted from his back and shot towards Pomni, wrapping her up tight enough to restrict her breathing. She thrashed about, trying to break free, but the tentacles had a grip of steel.
This creature's brain is telling us we don't need sustenance to survive here, but we still hunger.
Caine's maw opened wider than Pomni has ever seen it before in her short time in the digital circus. And if she didn't find an escape soon, that short time wouldn't be getting any longer. With no other options, she had to rely on the only idea that came to mind.
But eating me would be considered a violent act, and gratuitous violence isn't suitable for all ages.
For a brief moment, the beastly Caine stopped. And when he spoke, Pomni noticed Caine's voice was just that. There was no gravelly second voice coming from his mouth or his head. His mouth head? The tentacles loosened their grip around Pomni, dropping her to the ground with a thud. She picked herself up and ran. Though feelings of pain weren't completely gone, all the inhabitants of the circuit had a higher tolerance to what they could endure.
I wonder what else I can do in this body,
Pomni thought to herself.
and how I can use that to save everyone.
Unfortunately, these monsters clearly had some understanding of how the digital circus worked as well, and based on what Ragatha said about being able to see their friends from a distance, they probably could assimilate with whomever's mind they've taken over. Pomni slowed down to catch her breath. She had followed Caine's voice through the maze, but didn't pay attention to which direction she was moving in. Not that it would have mattered. Every tunnel in this weird sub-level looked identical thanks to all the tentacles from this venom thing Caine spoke of. Unbeknownst to her, the tentacles around her feet began slowly moving, retracting somewhere further down the tunnel that Pomni couldn't quite see. From the inky darkness, two mismatched eyes opened. A snarl came from the eye's direction, but Pomni couldn't see any mouth. The slow, uneven sound of footsteps began as the eyes got closer and closer. Pomni recognized the shape of the figure as Zooble, covered in tentacles like everyone else, except they seemed to be falling apart. Their arm fell lower than a normal person's would, with the only thing holding on their shoulder were thin, goo-like strands. As Zooble got closer, Pomni realized that they weren't falling apart. They were pulling themselves together, taking pieces from their surroundings to add to their body mass. Pomni stifled a scream and ran, not caring where she was going, as long as it was away from that thing. To her surprise, Pomni was able to find her way back through the maze of tentacles to the hole that she fell through initially. She climbed her way up and pulled herself out of the hole on her stomach. Once her entire body was clear of the abyss, she rolled onto her back and buried her head in her hands, taking in all that had happened in only a couple of minutes. She took a series of deep breaths, trying to calm her nerves. It was bad enough that she was stuck in this place with no way out and very little knowledge or experience of how the digital circus worked, but now it was overrun with creatures that can take over anyone, including Caine. If anyone else was left, they would have fared better against these creatures than her, but Pomni was still new to this place. Her best bet was try to find Gangle or Kinger. Neither of them were the greatest options between Gangle's volatile emotional state and Kinger's mental state, but either of them would have been better than going in alone. With one final deep breath, Pomni pulled her hands away from her face and opened her eyes. She stared up at the high ceiling of the tent, or at least she tried to, but there was something in her way. Pomni was staring into the empty black eyes of a theater mask, with a sharp maniacal grin spreading from one side to the other.
Hello, Pomni.
Just like everything else in the circus that defied logic, Gangle's mask mouse dribbled drool around Pomni's face. A mixture of red ribbons and black tendrils crawled across the floor towards Pomni, ready to grab her. Pomni shot up and began running, the ribbon tendrils striking the ground where she used to be.
I think Jack said something about Gangle's mask dominating her emotions. If I can find her tragedy mask, maybe that will calm her. This mask?
Pomni stopped and turned to look at the hulking amalgamation of ribbons behind her. Pomni turned her head and saw in a tangle of ribbons that resembled a hand was Gangle's tragedy mask. Pomni tried not to look too desperate, but she knew there was no way she could get the mask. Instead, she watched in horror as Gangle slowly closed her ribbon around it. The ceramic resisted, but ultimately caved to the pressure with a satisfying crack. When Gangle opened her hand again, the pieces of the mask fell and hit the ground, where they shattered even more. Gangle slowly approached Pomni, backing her against a wall. Once again, Pomni found herself trapped with no immediate means of escape. Suddenly, she had an idea. Bringing up something that Caine was concerned about had seemed to temporarily break whatever control he was under, so maybe the same would work for Gangle too. Pomni forced a smile and said in her most relaxed voice,
"Oh, hey Jax! About time you showed up."
Even with the other mask destroyed, Gangle's face had a notable shift of emotion. Gone was the malevolent grin, replaced with anxiety and fear. Gangle whipped around, trying to see where Jax could be, but there was no one behind her. She turned back around to face her captive, but there was no longer anyone in front of her either. As far as Gangle could see, Pomni was nothing more than a cloud of smoke. The real Pomni, however, didn't waste any time. As soon as Gangle turned around, she ran and ducked into the nearest hallway, hoping not to run into any more monsterized versions of her friends. But today just wasn't Pomni's day. Pomni slowly crept through the hall, keeping her head on a swivel and jumping at any noise she heard. Gangle was too quick for her, Ragatha's disdain for Pomni after she abandoned her was amplified, and Jax was still Jax, but worse. Her best bet was to remain hidden until she could find Kinger, as long as he wasn't hungry for her blood, or until she could think of a solution to fix everything. She continued walking, making sure to constantly check every direction, in front and behind, left and right, even above and below. Pomni wasn't taking any chances. A shrill cry rang out from behind her, echoing off the walls. Pomni jumped in her skin and ran without bothering to look to see who was coming for her. After all, it didn't matter who it was. They were all trying to feast on her the same. Pomni rounded the corner and collided with something narrow but hard, and was knocked to the ground. A little winded and disoriented, Pomni shook her head to regain her bearings before she looked at what she collided with. A tall piece of wood draped in a purple robe stood in the middle of the hall. She had run into Kinger, and a normal-looking Kinger at that.
"Oh, thank God, Kinger, I'm so glad I found you. Please, no one here is left, and the entire circus has been overrun by this thing called Venom, and Gangle's trying to attack me, and Jax is even more annoying, and they got to you too, didn't they?"
Kinger made no acknowledgement of being bumped into and never turned around when Pomni began speaking. All Pomni could hear was a small chuckle. A chuckle that became louder and louder as Kinger's body became more and more animated until he was throwing a full-on laughing fit. Pomni slowly pushed herself away, ready to run.
"I'm getting real sick of these fake-outs."
Pomni pulled herself up and continued running away from her friend for the 4th or 5th time that day. She had lost count at this point. She heard a fluttering coming from behind her, and against her better judgment, she turned to look back at Kinger, but he was no longer there. She could see both walls of the hallway, so he couldn't have moved left or right, and she doubted he was able to move through the floor, which left only one direction to check: up. And sure enough, when Pomni raised her head, she saw Kinger flying above her. His purple robe now a pair of gigantic wings that barely fit the width of the hall. His usual white gloves were now sharp claws, and he had several spindly insect-like legs protruding from his sides. Kinger swooped down and picked Pomni up in his clawed hands. He flew her out of the hall and into the tent's main area. From up in the air, Pomni could see everyone she knew at the Digital Circus. Jax, Ragatha, Caine, Zubul, and Gangle, all covered in gooey darkness of this venom, clamoring for her like a pack of hungry lions. Pomni didn't struggle against Kinger's grip. In fact, she held on to him for dear life. The idea of falling from such a height terrified her, Unfortunately, that grip wasn't enough to stop Kinger from releasing her right into the center of the horde. Pomni landed on her back, and immediately 6 sickeningly sinister smiles blocked out the light from the tent. Something wrapped around her left arm, then her right leg, then her right arm, then finally her left leg. She felt a pulling sensation from 4 different directions. They were going to tear her limb from limb. Literally. Luckily, to an extent, the Venomized Jax came in and punched her in the face, just as the 4 tentacles wrapped around each limb released her, sending her flying hard into the wall. Pomni got up dazed. Stars circled around her head, though she couldn't tell if they were real or not. As her double and blurred vision slowly straightened itself out, she saw Ragatha and Gangle rushing towards her. That's when Pomni noticed that the wall she smacked into was actually a door. It was hard to make out because it blended nearly perfectly in with the surrounding wall, but from this close, Pomni could see the crease going around it. She threw open the door, stepped inside, and slammed it shut, just as Gangle dove forward and smacked her face into the door. Pomni could have sworn she heard the sound of ceramic breaking on the other side. Inside the room, Pomni could just barely make out a staircase in the dim light. She could hear horrifying noises, but she wasn't sure if they were coming from the bottom of the stairs or the monsters on the other side of the door. Either way, she decided she would rather take her chances with whatever was in this room than what waited for her on the other side of the door. Ragatha pounded on the door with her giant fist. Kinger sat perched above the door, waiting for Pomni to come out.
Ugh, come on. I thought you said you had control over this place,
Zubul said.
We do, but this one's all-seeing eyes aren't down there, and I can't search his memories for some reason. We have no idea what's behind that door.
We don't need to know what's down there. We just need to get the jester out here. So work your magic and get her out.
I'm doing my best. There's just too much power.
Suddenly, a loud crash came from the door that Pomni hid behind. Zubul, Caine, and Jax all turned their attention to the source of the noise, where there was a huge cloud of dust. A low growl came from the dust, followed by screams. Both Ragatha and Kinger flew out of the dust cloud, almost as if they were tossed. Kinger was able to stabilize himself with his wings, but Ragatha hit the ground hard. A third figure emerged from the dust, a colossal black creature, one made up of glitching black material and spotted with eyes. The creature jumped and thrashed around like a feral animal finally being released from its containment. It let out a vicious roar, but there was another sound that could be heard, the panicked aspirations of a woman. Riding on the back of this giant creature was Pomni, who was holding on for dear life as the creature tried to shake her off. From behind, several more similar-looking creatures emerged from the cloud.
Well, it looks like the jester came prepared to fight. How cute.
Jax rushed toward Pomni and her makeshift steed, ready to take out the beast with one swipe of his claws, but as soon as he made contact with it, he collapsed.
What the f*** is this thing?
The symbiote looked at its hand, which was now distorted and glitchy like the creature's body.
Why does it hurt so much?
That's what happens when you come into contact with an abstracted being.
Pomni got off the beast to show that her entire body was glitching from riding on top of it.
Caine is the only one who can fix it. So you'll have to release him if you want the pain to stop.
Do it! Release the one with the teeth! Immediately, the symbiote possessing Caine peeled off of him, and Caine was back to his normal self.
My, what's happened here? I don't remember ordering squidding pasta to the circus.
Caine, some creatures took over the tent and started controlling everyone's minds. You can fix that, right?
Not a problem, Pomni.
With a snap, the vibrant colors of the circus were restored. While most of them still remained unconscious, all the inhabitants of the circus returned to their normal selves.
And away you go.
Caine summoned a small jar and, with a swirling tornado, shoved every last bit of the inky tentacles into it.
Now, who wants some bacon banana bread?
And there we have it, the conclusion to the Amazing Venomized Circus. Until they release more episodes of the show. I gotta say, this one was really fun. I especially love how Gangle turned out, and the fact that I was even able to have the time to make a quick 3D render of the circus itself to use as the backgrounds. Absolutely beautiful. This one was so much fun to do. Thank you all of you who watched the first video and said you wanted a part 2. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and hopefully I can Venomize Pomni in the future. It just didn't fit with the story I had, so never say never, right? And that's all I got for you today. If you had fun with this video, feel free to hit that like button. I was talking with the YouTube algorithm actually, and they said that every person who hits that like button, they won't end up in a virtual realm with absolutely no escape, and this video will just be pushed out to more people. So if you would like to save your sanity and not abstract, like button's right down there for you. And if you want more content, there's obviously the Amazing Venomized Circus Part 1, 5 Nights of Venoms, and a whole bunch of other cool content on this channel that I'm sure you'll enjoy, so feel free to check that out. As always, playlist link to the music I was listening to during this project in the description. That's all I've got for you today. I'm KyngPin Creations, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.